Hello and welcome to this audio recording. This is Jill Wigmore-Welsh from Reading in Berkshire, bringing you another episode in the Well Aware podcast and body sensing and movement awareness lessons, amongst other things. So today's recording is designed to accompany a talk that I've created, which is on your pelvis and lower axial skeleton. Now, during that talk, we explored how the pelvis and lumbar spine work together to load, organise and power movement, and why restoring integrity in this area builds resilient function and dynamic ease. The talk that I created is available through my website. If you want to listen, you can send me a message. I'll put the link and details in the description below. There is a cost for listening to the talk, but that's how it is. So this practical is an additional sort of piece of information to go with that talk. And during the talk we were talking literally about how you can restore alignment, help to reset your pelvis and lumbar position, how you can rebuild your strength by reactivating key muscles, and how you can reclaim balance by developing coordinated dynamic ease. So the purpose of this talk is actually to introduce a few concepts that you can take away and start using. Now, none of the recordings that I make are meant to be in any way therapeutic. They're not meant to be a treatment. These are explorations. They're designed to be very gentle, very low-level processes. As many of you will know, I did a core skills training as a Feldenkrais method practitioner. I started studying that work in 1990, which is a long time ago, and I was a pioneer in the UK taking that work into working with people with musculoskeletal problems, into working with Team GB. I worked with 3 Olympic sports, rowing, judo and diving. I worked with lots of performers, etc. So I've used this work now for over 35 years. And I find that many people who have problems with their movement are confronted by going to see practitioners who tell them the right way to move, and actually, for many people, discovering a gentle way to begin to start to rediscover their body without awakening trauma, because most of my clients have pain. If it's not pain physically, it's emotional trauma. And going gently at your own pace is a key principle in the work that I do. So I call my work now Fractal Feldenkrais, and the reason I've rebranded it as that is quite simply because my work has evolved. I have a background in zoology, and my work has evolved to integrate my physiotherapeutic studies, decades of work in that area, also my interest in neuroscience, my psychology training, behavioural psychology qualifications, psychotherapy training, etc., etc. So I use the work extensively with clients, and mostly it's with people who are interested in exploring, finding out how they can learn kindly and safely to use themselves without feeling that they're doing the right or wrong thing. So reclaiming your body is what this is all about, this talk today, as it were, this presentation, this bit that's gone with the lesson. Reclaiming your body and what it's designed to do is very important. If you're reclaiming your body, then it means that you're beginning to start to show interest in it. We know that if you're not using a certain area for a long period of time, the lack of proprioceptive messages coming into the brain, lack of information, means that you can develop a bit of amnesia, forgetting how to do things. And the best way to start is actually to go very gently. So the lessons are not designed to be a corrective, they're designed to be exploration. So we're going to be thinking of the lower axial skeleton, which from my description is pretty much around thoracic 10th thoracic, down through all the lumbar vertebra, the pelvic girdle, hip, etc. I'm thinking of how all of that works together, and how when your lower axial skeleton is working quite well in sitting or standing, everything above and below being affected, your posture, your movement, etc. Often it makes it a lot easier to organise yourself in a simple way. So we're going to be beginning with the first process, which is about restoring alignment. This is really around discovering where your pelvis, what your pelvis configuration is. It's not about the right way or wrong way, it's actually, as I said, about thinking about your configuration. And during the talk, I was introducing ischial tuberosities, sit bones, and how if we're able to get those in a position that we're actually sitting on the sit bones rather than sitting on perhaps on our bottom muscles, roll back onto that bottom muscle, what does that do? And so this is perhaps a good place to start. And it might be nice to find, it can be any chair actually. You can actually use any chair and do this very first exploration. Where you're sitting right now, you could put your fingers, like 2 index fingers, right and left, and find the bony prominences that sit on the front of your pelvis. So it doesn't matter if you're sitting, what you're sitting on, just find those bony prominences. And notice if by making like a little movement in your back, there's any way you can get those bony prominences to move. It might be that by rolling your back a bit more rounded, you find that the bony prominences move one way, perhaps a bit. And then you try doing it in the opposite way and maybe they move a bit. But first of all, just see if you have available to you any way, without efforting, without really putting much strain on. And you might find that you can't feel any movement in one direction, but when you try doing it in the opposite direction, you can feel a bit of movement. And even that, as and of itself, becoming aware that something that you're doing is causing some sort of change. Now, if that's the chair you usually sit on, it might be a work chair, it might be an armchair, it might be a stool in the kitchen. Maybe you could go and try it on another chair. Just literally go and move yourself into another room if you're able to. If you're stuck in a wheelchair, of course, I don't mean stuck, but if you're in the wheelchair and you can't get out, you're going to have to wait until maybe you're positioned in sitting on something else. But if you can find yourself sitting on another chair, maybe you're sitting at work, you work in a co-working space or something like that, and you find yourself sitting on a different kind of chair, maybe a chair that you don't usually sit on, you could try the same thing. Just sort of allow yourself to explore how you could get that little bit of movement in the pelvis with minimal amount of effort, and which direction really is the easiest direction for it to go in. Is it easiest for the front of the pelvis to sort of move backwards, I guess, is a way of describing it, or is it easiest for it to sort of move forwards? And I suggest that one place to start with this would be to actually just take this very simple process, literally, and go and try it out on about 20 different seats. You don't have to do it all now, but you can actually go and try this out wherever you are. You can just take this with you and spend a few seconds and try it out on a stool. Might be sitting in the pub. We have pubs in the UK. I don't know where you're listening to this from, but anyway. You could try it if you're in the theatre. You could just sort of subtly see if you can roll your pelvis back and what that does, and move it back and forward and see how difficult it is to do this movement. You could try it if you've got a low stool in the kitchen. You could try it on an armchair. You could try it anywhere. Just find out which direction and what configuration, what place is easiest for you to actually have some kind of capability to be actually thinking about this movement of the pelvis. Because when you move the pelvis, there is going to be a movement of the lumbar spine as well. So just this simple action of beginning to start to explore is one step towards restoring what some people might call optimal alignment, but what I would probably call having choice. And remember, as you're moving, that making that movement happen, and you can feel your fingers on your pelvis, this is also having an effect on all of your internal organs, which are all moving around. There might be a little bit of muscle working, but this might be something so different from what you're used to doing. You may never have explored what it's like just to actually move your pelvis. You may not know which is the most naturally easy way for you to move. And bearing in mind that your habits are going to be unique to you, if you practice this and start to discover what is your unique habit that you like to do, and then try it on lots of different chairs. Maybe if you're on a bus, nobody's watching, you can just sort of try a little bit of movement. Or if you're on the train and nobody's, you could just sort of try this strange idea of moving the pelvis. And notice if it's if you hold your breath, because if you hold your breath, that might be a signal that actually this is quite an effort. So try and see if you can reduce it down to the point where you can do a little bit of movement, you can feel a little bit of movement, but you're not having to hold your breath to do it, or you're not having to work your muscles really hard. So bring it down to the sort of lowest common denominator, the easiest way you can do this. And this is a really good start to discovering about restoring alignment, resetting your pelvis and your lumbar spine. You need to start with something very simple that seems safe, and then that way it isn't going to be too traumatic. And you might want to write down what you discover. You might want to write down the different chairs you sat on and what you discovered about this movement, how easy or hard it was, where you started and where you finished, what you learned from it. And that's more important than anything else, because if you discover that there's something you learn, write it down. If you find a movement causes discomfort, well then do less. But it doesn't mean you stop doing the movement completely. Maybe you could just reduce it down, like even a tiny glimmer of movement. Just so there is a little bit you're doing. Introduce it very gently. Maybe the opposite movement is easiest. But this is just a start, and I think it's good to have a place to start and a place where you can feel really comfortable and know that actually even this tiny movement is sending messages in through your central nervous system. This is resetting some of your brain to be a little bit more aware of this part of your body. So I hope that's been helpful. We're going to move on now to the second process. And of course it links together. So The second process was about rebuilding strength and reactivating key muscles. Well, there are an enormous number of muscles, and we're not going to be thinking about trying to access one muscle at a time. What we're going to do is to just think about whether there is any muscle activity when you go to do the same movement that you did before. And where do you feel it? Is there a little maybe tightening in your tummy muscles? I don't know. Is there something happening in your diaphragm? Again, just bringing your attention to where that first little group of muscles is starting to activate. Because we want to do this without pain, we want to do it very subtly, and we want to do it at a very low level of awareness, because if you do that combination and do it slowly, then what's going to happen is your central nervous system is going to feel safe. If you make a big contraction of muscles, you're probably not going to feel things as well. If you move quickly, your central nervous system is probably going to be scared because you might get pain. So move slowly, very slowly. And if you start to notice there's a little activation of a muscle, if you want to, you can make it just that little bit more and see what that does. Because remember, when we're starting to strengthen muscle, the first thing we have to do is to be able to connect with the muscle. So if you've got sort of muscle memory amnesia, then it's not easy to connect with the muscle because you can't remember how to make it contract. So if you're able to work in a way that feels safe for you and easy for you, as you do that first little bit of a movement, you might find something tightens. I don't know. You might find it's deep down inside. You feel something inside your pelvis. You might feel your bottom muscles tighten a little bit. I don't know. I'm happy at this stage for you to be just focusing on what it is you can feel. Because we know that interoception, the ability to feel inside yourself, is also reduced when you've not been thinking about an area for a long time, or when you've had pain, or when you've not been moving. So I'm not too bothered about what it is that you first notice, as long as what you first notice isn't pain, and then I am concerned. So just go really easy and really slow. Just feel the muscles tightening anywhere, just a little bit, and just see if you can gently encourage them to work a little bit more. But remember, although this recording is going on for like 18, 20, 30 minutes, you don't work with it for 18 or 13 minutes. No, you actually just work with it for a second or two. You just do a little bit. And like the previous exploration, when I suggested that what you did was to go and try things out on different chairs, what you can do here is the same thing. You can try this out when you sit down on a different chair and bring your attention to the muscles. I think, oh, that's interesting. When I'm sitting in this, I feel these muscles working. Maybe maybe you feel no muscles working. That's perfectly okay as well. We can start from that. It doesn't matter. But just be beginning to start to understand that the basics of rebuilding strength is that you have to be able to connect to the muscles. If you can't connect to the muscles, then you can't rebuild strength. So enjoy this, and we'll move on to the third process. Now, the third process is to do with reclaiming balance. Now, as you begin to start to think about balance, depending on your level of capability, I mean, everybody has their own level of ability and balance that they need and want to be able to do in order to be able to do what they want in life. Whether you're someone who spends most of their time in a wheelchair, who really can't manage to do transfers without a hoist or a lift or something similar, there may be some time where you need to have a bit of balance, like sitting on the side of the bed. It might be during the process of coming up into sitting, you need to have some kind of balance. So all I want you to do in terms of thinking about balance is actually just to think about ways that you could very slightly introduce, in a position where you feel safe, introduce a very slow movement so that your weight is very fractionally starting to shift over that centre of gravity. So you're moving just slightly outside your balance. Feel what it feels like to move there. And then move back. So again, you're not causing any trauma or stress. So you might just find that if you're able to stand, you might just find that the first part of going over towards standing on one leg, you go very, very slowly, and you notice at what point your system feels that it needs to start to adjust in order to accommodate the fact that you've moved. And you can take this right down to the sort of lowest level of movement, because having awareness through all levels is important. If you want to be able to do something quickly and have quick reaction times, you need to be really good at doing something slowly. So either in sitting, just moving your weight slightly over to the side and then noticing, whoop, that feels as if I'm going to go over, and just bringing yourself back up. Or in standing, again, going over to one side, feeling the place where you can feel that everything needs to adjust a little bit here. Maybe something needs to happen in your lower thoracic spine. Maybe there's a little bit of sideways movement or something similar. That means you need to start just making some adjustments to keep yourself in balance. And also thinking about how, if you get your head upright and you're looking ahead, how does that feel with your balance? Maybe if you're gazing out and have something in your visual field, you can find that makes a difference to your balance. But let's start small. Let's start with some very simple movements done well. So we've been through 3 different processes which you can practice, and I would encourage you to practice those little and often. Explore. They're not medical treatments, remember. This is something you can use and you can explore, and you can do this as often as you like. This is Jill Wigmore-Welsh from Reading in Berkshire, just bringing you a little lesson that accompanies the talk that I've done today, that is all about the pelvis. It's all about the pelvis and lower axial skeleton, and starting to think about how you can get this area stable, because obviously there's an enormous amount of weight above that centre of gravity, and your head well above that is quite vulnerable to damage. So being able to control things from this bottom section here, if you like, literally bottom section, is something very important. So if you want to get in touch with me, if you're interested in hearing more about studying movement awareness, and you're interested in practical interventions to enable you to function better, or anything to do with osteoporosis, bone health, or osteopenia, do drop me a message, and I look forward to bringing you another episode very soon.